Hello, my name is Isabel. How many of you guys had your first drink before you were 21? If you're anything like me, you probably had it in high school. In the 80s, the drinking age was raised to 21 with the goal to reduce highway fatalities. Since then, 100 or so college presidents, some from prestigious universities, have signed a declaration stating that the age of 21 is not working, and it began a national debate. They claim that it's counterproductive. Each year, students spend $5.5 billion on alcohol, more than they spend on soft drinks, tea, milk, juice, coffee, books combined. It's obvious that this law is not eliminating teen drinking, and it's in fact increasing and rapidly. On CBS 60 Minutes, John McCardle states that the law has not reduced or eliminated drinking. It has simply driven it underground into the most risky and least manageable settings. So I'm here to discuss how the drinking requirement does not work and it's counterproductive. The age restriction only limits access. It does not keep alcohol completely out of the hands of the youth. It does not lower the amount of drivers under the influence directly. And third, it drives drinking underground where it's not being able to be controlled. The age restriction only limits the access. 90% of high school seniors claim that alcohol is fairly easy to obtain, whether they have a fake ID, they go into a local liquor store, they find an older brother, or even legal guardians and parents sometimes provide alcohol for children. It's not completely unheard of. Alcohol use among teenagers remains widespread. 72% have consumed alcohol by the end of high school graduation, and more than 37% have done so by the end of 8th grade. So that's well before they're 15. And according to Sam Tracy, who's the chairman of Students for Sensible Drug Policy, who is also a former residence administrator at a college, says that people younger than 21 cannot buy or possess alcohol in the U.S., yet that age group accounts for 17.5% of consumer spending in alcohol nationwide. It does not lower the amount of drivers under the influence. It's along the lines of it going underground. Teens feel like they cannot confide in their parents where they're actually going. They can't just leave their car and call a cab because, then they're questioned by their parents, where is their car? So it doesn't necessarily lower the risk of them driving. Mothers Against Drunk Driving, they're kind of radical, but they claim that driving fatalities have skyrocketed after states lowered the minimum age during the 70s. However, this is not necessarily true. In an article published in the Huffington Post, Tracy states that while drunk driving deaths have declined since the National Minimum Drinking Age Act of 1984 became a law, this trend actually started increasing in the 70s. No study has actually proven a cause and effect correlation relationship between the heightened drinking age and reduced drunk driving deaths. Reductions have occurred in countries all over the world in the number of fatalities and DUIs that have lower minimum ages. We have the highest age requirement. According to the DMV statistics of the Department of Motor Vehicles of California, for every 10,000 licenses, 19.4% of the DUIs occurred within the 19-year range. When I did more digging into specifically why that range was so impacted, it's mainly because they don't have an avenue to be able to go and drink safely. While drinking is relevant at any age, teens that have no safe place to consume feel like they essentially get pushed to the wheel. The drinking age limit leads them straight there. It drives drinking underground. The current age forces the youth to experiment in unsafe environments, which leads to a higher level of binge drinking. So house parties or excessive drinking before a sporting event, tailgating, red cups, cheap beer, all of it. Current education teaches us to abstain from alcohol consumption rather than educate on responsible consumption. So I'm sure we all remember the DARE program growing up, They tell you all these horrific stories and kind of use scare tactics on why you shouldn't do these things, but they never teach if you decide to engage in this behavior, because one day you will, one day we will be 21, this is the way that you should drink and consume. that would help a lot more. On average, young people have 5 drinks on a single occasion, which is considered binge drinking. So going right back to the education factor, you know, if we were taught about, you know, how to consume responsibly, and all those things, maybe we could reduce that significantly. Thank you. That's who I am. Whatever. I know I talk like that. When I go to like East Coast, say, I thought you
Yes.
All right, Isabel, you present us with a partial background on the driving age issue. If you're going to make reference to the original MAD movement, and then you're going to try and discredit it as a source of declining highway fatalities, you need to give us that more complete picture so that we can see what the context of the data is. And you make it sound like at the beginning that everybody raised their driving age to 21. California, for instance, never changed the drinking age. It's always been 21. It didn't lower it. It didn't increase it. It's always been 21. And that is the case with a lot of states. So the argument that you're making seems to be suggesting that the change in the law didn't have any effect on, or it had only a minimal effect on the drunk driving issues. We'll get to that in just a second. There's some background data on alcohol consumption. I think that that's pretty effective when people started consuming alcohol. You do want to be careful about assuming that because somebody had their first drink before they were 15 means that they drank regularly at age 15. That's not exactly the same thing, and I think that you need better data on that point. You had the right first step, and you need the second step that's going along with that. Your proposition's labeled. It's actually phrased with multiple parts. And the secondary claims, the phrasing on those claims is sometimes a little sideways, if you will. There's 2 of the points have negative terminology in them, which we've asked you to try and avoid having in the claims, so that's a little complicated. And one of them sounds like it's really more informative rather than making an inference on it, which is kind of strange because once we get into the body of the speech, I don't really hear any specific citation of those secondary points again. Information's being presented that is sometimes relevant to the points that you're presenting, but it's not being connected to those points, and it did feel frequently like we would go back to the same issue with different evidence in several places. And so the internal structure, I didn't think, followed the setup that you had at the beginning of the presentation very clearly, and it felt like a lot of the evidence is being presented sequentially without any particular inference that's being connected to. I did think that you had some good information in a lot of places. For example, to me, the very convincing piece of evidence that you have about the regular use of alcohol by people under the age of 21 is the percentage of money that is spent, or the amount of consumers. You've got a 70% statistic that you cite that comes from people under the age of 21. The source citation on that was a little bit strange. I'm sure that advocate got that information from some sites. The fact that they were a former resident advisor in a college dorm doesn't necessarily mean that they are knowledgeable about this. I'm sure that they picked it up someplace, so it would probably behoove you to find the original statistic someplace. I'm not saying that it's not true. I'm just saying that it seems like that's a pretty good piece of information to demonstrate the point that you're making. I thought that there was some inconsistency on the citations. Like I said, you had a couple of pieces of testimony that you cited pretty effectively, and then there's some other statistical information that is referred to that doesn't get a source citation on it. at the end, there's this interesting number. I'm not exactly sure what I'm supposed to make out of it about the driver's licenses. You know, one out of every 10,000 driver's licenses, and it's got some relationship with the alcohol consumption. But it was not clear to me what the relationship was, and it was also not clear to me where the data came from. So I think you need to be a little bit sharper in putting that information together. Now, let's go back to the one issue that I was mentioning earlier, and that is the response, because it's basically a rebuttal argument that you've got built in here. The data that you present talks about declining rates of fatalities that had already started in the 70s, but it doesn't really talk about what the impact was of lowering the drinking age to 18 in the early 70s, and that's the statistical data that motivated the movement in the first place to make a standard drinking age and to make that standard drinking age at 21. So I think that you need a little bit more context on that rebuttal argument. All right, thank you.